My name is Marcus, and for most of my adult life I believed I had a strong marriage. My wife Lily and I were together for almost 12 years, 8 of those married. Until recently, I would have told anyone that we were the kind of couple that worked through anything. Now I'm not so sure. I'm writing this because some people in our lives think I'm overreacting, while others say I didn't react strongly enough. The truth is, I still feel like my world flipped upside down overnight. I met Lily when we were both 25. We worked in the same hospital, though in very different roles. I was part of the IT department that managed the hospital systems, and Lily was a nurse in the emergency department. Our schedules were chaotic, but somehow that made our early relationship feel exciting. We would meet for late dinners after her shifts, or early breakfasts before mine started. Lily was incredibly compassionate. She had a way of connecting with people, especially patients who were scared or in pain. I admired that about her deeply. After 3 years of dating, we got married. The early years of our marriage were what most people would call normal. We had our routines, our inside jokes, and our occasional arguments about things like chores or money. But overall, we were stable. We bought a small house together and adopted a dog named Charlie. Neither of us had perfect careers, but we supported each other. Around our 6th year of marriage, Lily started working more overtime shifts. At first it was because the hospital was short-staffed. Nurses were leaving faster than they could hire replacements, and the remaining staff were constantly stretched thin. I respected how hard she worked. Nursing is exhausting, both physically and emotionally, so when she came home late or seemed drained, I tried to be supportive, but over time, her schedule started changing in ways that didn't always make sense. She began volunteering for extra shifts more often. Sometimes she would say she was covering for a co-worker. Other times, she said, she had to stay late because the emergency room was overwhelmed. Again, I didn't question it much. Hospitals are unpredictable places, but small things started feeling off. She became more protective of her phone. She started dressing a little differently before work, putting more effort into her appearance than usual. When I asked casually about her day, she sometimes gave vague answers. At first I told myself I was imagining things. Then one night about 6 months ago, something happened that made my stomach drop. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch after a long shift. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table next to me. Normally, I would never look at it, it just wasn't something I believed in doing. But the message preview popped up on the screen. It said, "I miss you already." The sender's name was Eric. I sat there staring at the phone for what felt like 10 minutes. My heart was pounding, but part of me still hoped there was some innocent explanation. Eventually curiosity got the better of me. I opened the message thread. What I found confirmed my worst fear. The conversation wasn't just flirtatious, it was clearly romantic and physical. There were messages talking about meeting after shifts, jokes about keeping things secret, and comments that made it obvious they had been seeing each other for a while. The worst part was realizing that Eric was another nurse from her department. Someone she worked with almost every day. When Lily woke up later, I confronted her immediately. At first she tried to deny it, but when I showed her the messages, she broke down crying. She admitted everything. According to her, the affair had started about 4 months earlier. She said the hospital environment was stressful, and she had grown close to Eric during long overnight shifts. They started talking more, then flirting, and eventually crossed the line. When I asked if she loved him, she said no. She insisted it was just a mistake, and that it didn't mean anything. Hearing that almost made it worse. Because if it didn't mean anything, then why risk destroying our marriage? Over the next few days, we had dozens of painful conversations. Lily promised she would end the relationship immediately. She said she would even transfer departments if necessary. She cried and begged for another chance, saying she had made a terrible mistake and didn't want to lose our life together. Some of our friends encouraged me to try counseling before making any big decisions. They said long marriages go through rough periods and that people sometimes make bad choices under stress. I considered it seriously, but Something inside me kept coming back to the same thought. The affair didn't happen in one moment. It happened through hundreds of small decisions, every message, every meeting, every lie about working late. Eventually I told Lily I needed space to think. I moved into my brother's spare room for a few weeks. During that time, Lily called and texted constantly. She wrote long messages apologizing and promising that she would do anything to repair the damage. But the more time I spent away from the house, the clearer my thoughts became. I realized something important. Even if I tried to forgive her, I didn't know if I could ever fully trust her again. Every late shift would make me wonder. Every message notification would make me suspicious. That kind of constant doubt didn't sound like a healthy marriage. So 3 weeks ago, I told Lily I wanted a divorce. She reacted exactly how you'd expect, crying, begging, asking me to reconsider. She kept repeating that the affair wasn't serious and that she chose me in the end. But to me, choosing me after getting caught isn't the same as choosing me from the start. Now some people, mostly her friends, say I'm throwing away 12 years of love over something that lasted only 4 months. They say marriages survive. Worse. Others say trust is the foundation of everything, and once it's broken, walking away is completely reasonable. I honestly don't know anymore. Part of me still loves her, but another part of me feels like the relationship I believed in might not have existed the way I thought it did. So now I'm left asking the same question over and over. AITA, for deciding to leave after my wife's affair, even though she says it didn't mean anything and wants another chance. I never thought I would be the kind of person who would cut off their entire family. Growing up, I was always the one who believed that family came before everything else. No matter what happened, you stuck together. At least that's what I was taught. Now I'm 36, and I haven't spoken to most of my relatives in over a year. Some people say I'm justified. Others say I'm bitter and holding grudges. Honestly, I still go back and forth in my head sometimes. For context, I'm the middle child in my family. My older brother Caleb is 3 years older than me, and my younger sister Maya is 5 years younger. Our parents, Ronald and Patricia, were the kind of parents who believed in working hard and sacrificing for your family. At least, that's what they always said. Growing up, Caleb was the golden child. He was charismatic, good at sports, and always seemed to get away with things that would get me grounded for weeks. Teachers loved him, neighbors loved him, and my parents always said he was destined for big things. I was different. I was quieter, more focused on school and building a stable future. I didn't get into trouble, but I also didn't get much attention unless something went wrong. My sister Maya was the baby of the family. Everyone protected her, especially Caleb. Despite the differences, I always tried to be a good son and brother. When I got my first decent job in my mid-20s as a civil engineer, I started helping my parents financially. They never asked directly, but I could see they struggled sometimes. So I paid a few bills here and there, covered repairs on their house, bought groceries when things got tight. I didn't think much of it. That's what family does, right? Meanwhile, Caleb's life didn't exactly turn out the way everyone expected. He bounced between jobs, started a few businesses that never went anywhere, and had a habit of borrowing money from relatives. My parents constantly defended him. He's just finding his path. My mom would say he's got big ideas. My dad would add, I tried not to judge. People struggle sometimes. About 8 years ago, Caleb came to me with what he said was a huge opportunity. He wanted to start a small construction contracting company. Since I worked in engineering, he thought my knowledge and connections could help, but he also needed money. Specifically, he needed $40,000 to get started. At first I refused. It was a huge amount of money, and I had been saving for a house at the time. But then my parents got involved. They started telling me how important this opportunity was for Caleb, how this could finally get him on his feet, how family should support each other. Eventually, They convinced me. We wrote up a simple agreement saying the money was a loan, not a gift. Caleb promised he would pay me back within 2 years once the business started making profit. For the first few months, things looked promising. He got a few small contracts and seemed excited about the future. Then the excuses started. Projects fell through. Clients delayed payments. Equipment broke. Months turned into years. Not only did he never repay the loan, but he eventually shut the business down entirely. When I tried to talk to him about the money, he got defensive. He said I knew the risks and that I should be more understanding. My parents immediately sided with him. They told me I was being selfish for pressuring him about money when he was already struggling. That hurt more than losing the money itself. But the real betrayal came years later. 3 years ago, my parents decided to sell the family house. The housing market in our area had exploded, and the property had nearly tripled in value since they bought it decades ago. They told us their plan was to sell the house and divide the money among the 3 kids after setting aside their retirement fund. It sounded fair. But when the house finally sold, something strange happened. They called a family meeting. That's when my dad announced that Caleb would be receiving a much larger portion of the money. When I asked why, he said Caleb needed it more because his finances were unstable. Then my mom added something that honestly stunned me. She said they considered the $40,000 I loaned Caleb years earlier to be part of my share of the inheritance, meaning they were basically counting the money my brother never repaid as if it had already been returned. I remember sitting there trying to process what they were saying. I told them that made absolutely no sense. Caleb still owed me that money. My sister Maya surprisingly stayed quiet the whole time. Eventually she admitted she had known about the plan for months. That might have been the moment that hurt the most. Everyone else had discussed it behind my back. I was the only one who walked into that meeting thinking things would be fair. I tried arguing, explaining that the loan agreement clearly stated Caleb owed me, not our parents. But they dismissed it. My dad told me I was being greedy. My mom said I had always been the stable one and didn't need the help as much as Caleb. That's when something in me snapped. 4 years I had helped them financially. I had supported them whenever they needed it. I had trusted them when they encouraged me to help Caleb. And now they were basically rewriting the story to make it seem like I had already been compensated. I stood up, told them I felt completely betrayed, and walked out. Over the following months, things only got worse. Caleb started telling extended relatives that I was causing drama over money and trying to punish the family. Some cousins started messaging me saying I should just let it go. Even my sister Maya eventually told me I should move on for the sake of family peace. But I couldn't, because it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about realizing that the people I trusted most had been willing to manipulate things behind my back 4 years. Eventually I made a decision I never thought I would make. I cut them all off. I stopped attending family gatherings. I stopped answering calls. I blocked Caleb completely. For the first time in my life, I focused entirely on building a life that didn't revolve around trying to prove my worth to them. Ironically, life has been much calmer since then, but recently my mom reached out through a mutual relative saying the family is heartbroken about the distance and that I should forgive them. Some relatives say I'm holding on to anger too tightly. Others say what they did was incredibly unfair and that I'm justified in protecting myself. Part of me wonders if I should try to reconnect eventually, but another part of me remembers sitting in that living room realizing everyone else already knew the plan except me. So now I'm left wondering, AITA for cutting off my family after they betrayed me like that. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone. The kind of place where kids you met in kindergarten were usually the same people you graduated high school with. For some people that meant lifelong friendships. For me, It meant living next door to my bully for almost 20 years. My name is Danielle, and my neighbor growing up was a girl named Courtney. Our houses were separated by a narrow strip of grass and a crooked wooden fence. From the outside, our families looked similar. Two middle-class households, parents who worked regular jobs, kids riding bikes down the same quiet streets. But inside school, things were very different. Courtney started bullying me in 3rd grade. At first it was the small things that teachers often ignore. Snide comments about my clothes, laughing when I answered questions wrong in class, whispering things just loud enough for me to hear. Back then I didn't understand why she targeted me. I was a quiet kid, the kind who preferred reading books over playing loud games at recess. I wore glasses and had braces early. I was also one of the few kids in our class who was more focused on school than popularity. That seemed to make me the perfect target. By middle school, the bullying had gotten worse. Courtney was popular. She had a tight group of friends who followed her lead, and she knew how to manipulate social situations in ways that teachers rarely noticed. She wouldn't always say things directly to me. Sometimes she would say them to other people while looking straight at me. Comments like, "Some people are just born awkward," or "Imagine thinking grades actually matter after high school." Her friends would laugh. I would pretend not to hear. The worst part was that we lived next door to each other. There was no escaping it. If she saw me outside, she would make exaggerated gagging noises or whisper things to whoever she was with. Sometimes, she would accidentally kick a ball into our yard, just so she could come retrieve it and make another comment. I remember asking my mom once why Courtney hated me so much. My mom said something that stuck with me for years. Sometimes people tear others down because they're afraid of feeling small themselves. At the time, it didn't make the bullying easier, but it helped me understand something important later in life. Instead of fighting back socially, which I wasn't good at, I focused on things I could control. School became my escape. I buried myself in books and studying. While Courtney spent most of her time worrying about popularity, I spent mine figuring out what I wanted my future to look like outside that small town. By the time we reached high school, our lives had completely different trajectories. Courtney was still popular, but her focus seemed to be parties and social drama. Meanwhile, was taking advanced classes and working part-time at the local library. The bullying didn't completely stop, but it became more subtle. Things like sarcastic applause when I received academic awards, or comments about how I would probably leave town and never survive the real world. Ironically, that prediction became partially true. When I graduated high school, I left for college in another state. It felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater for years. For the first time in my life, no one knew me as the quiet girl Courtney made fun of. I could just be Danielle. College was challenging, but it was also freeing. I studied business management, worked internships, and slowly built confidence I never had growing up. Eventually, I moved to a larger city and started working at a small consulting firm. Over time, through a mix of hard work and luck, I worked my way up the ladder. By my early 30s, I had become a regional operations director for a mid-sized company. My job involved managing teams, opening new offices, and occasionally recruiting talent. Life had moved forward. I rarely thought about Courtney anymore. That changed last year when my parents decided to downsize their house and move closer to my older brother. They asked if I could come back to our hometown for a couple weeks to help them pack and sort through things. I agreed. Driving back into that town felt surreal. So much of it looked the same: the grocery store, the park, the familiar rows of houses. Even the crooked fence between our old yard and Courtney's house was still there. One afternoon, while I was helping my parents clean out the garage, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in more than a decade. "Danielle, is that you?" I turned around and saw Courtney standing in her parents' driveway. She looked different, older obviously, but also strangely stuck in time. The same house, the same yard, the same place she had been since childhood. We exchanged an awkward greeting. At first the conversation was polite and surface level. She asked what I'd been doing since high school, and I briefly explained my career and where I lived now. That's when her tone shifted. She suddenly became very interested in my job. Specifically, she asked if my company ever hired people remotely or had entry-level administrative positions. I later learned from my parents that Courtney had never really left town. She had attended a local community college for a while but dropped out. She worked a few short-term jobs but didn't stick with any of them. Now she was living with her parents again. During our conversation, she didn't acknowledge the past at all. Not a single apology, not even a hint that she remembered how she treated me. Instead, she casually said something like, "Maybe you could put in a good word for me. It sounds like your company is doing really well." I stood there feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. Another part of me remembered years of humiliation, whispered insults, and feeling trapped next door to someone who made my childhood miserable. I told her politely that hiring decisions were complicated and depended on qualifications. She pushed a little harder, asking if I could at least pass her resume along. I said I'd think about it. Later that evening, I told my parents about the conversation. My mom surprised me by saying maybe helping her could be a way to show how much I'd grown. But my dad had a different perspective. He reminded me that forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the past never happened. Since then, Courtney has messaged me twice on social media, asking if I had any updates about job opportunities. Each time I stare at the message and feel conflicted. On one hand, I've built a life by focusing on moving forward rather than holding grudges. On the other hand, this is someone who made my childhood significantly harder and never once acknowledged it. Now she wants help from the very person she spent years tearing down. So I'm genuinely unsure what the right response is. AITA if I refuse to help my childhood bully get a job at my company after everything she put me through. I grew up in a town so small that people still gave directions using landmarks that had closed 10 years earlier. Everyone knew each other's families, histories, and mistakes. It was the kind of place where reputations stuck to you for life. For me, unfortunately, that reputation started when I was 9 years old. My name is Elena, and the girl who made my childhood miserable was named Vanessa. Vanessa lived 2 houses down from mine. Our parents weren't friends exactly, but they were neighbor-friendly. They'd wave when they passed each other, occasionally chat about the weather, that sort of thing. At first, when we were very young, Vanessa and I even played together sometimes. We rode bikes on the same street and went to the same elementary school. But something changed around 4th grade. Vanessa suddenly decided that I was the perfect target. To this day, I don't know exactly why. I wasn't loud or confrontational. I was a shy kid who loved drawing and reading fantasy books. I also came from a family that wasn't as well off as many others in town. Vanessa, on the other hand, had a personality that seemed built for attention. She was confident, loud, and always surrounded by friends. When she started making fun of me, those friends quickly joined in. The first time it happened was during recess. I had brought a sketchbook to school because our teacher had encouraged us to practice drawing. I was sitting on the playground bench sketching a tree when Vanessa walked up with 2 other girls. She grabbed the sketchbook out of my hands without asking, "What is this supposed to be?" She asked loudly. "A tree," I said quietly. She held the book up so the others could see and laughed. "It looks like a dead stick." Her friends laughed. It sounds small now, but moments like that started happening almost every day. If I answered a question in class, she would whisper something sarcastic to the person next to her. If I wore the same hoodie twice in 1 week, she would point it out loudly. If I tried to join group activities, she would make sure I felt unwanted. The teachers occasionally noticed something was wrong, but Vanessa was careful. She rarely bullied me directly in front of authority figures. Most of it happened in hallways, on the bus, or at recess, and because she lived so close, it didn't stop after school. Sometimes when I walked home, she and her friends would follow behind me just close enough to keep talking about me loudly. I remember one particular afternoon in 6th grade when she said, something that stuck with me for years. She looked at me and said, "You know, Elena, you're the kind of person who's going to live here forever, because nobody else would want you." At the time, I believed her. Middle school was even worse. Kids are brutal at that age. And Vanessa had mastered the art of social control. She decided who was in and who wasn't. Because of that, many kids avoided becoming friends with me out of fear of being her next target. By the time we reached high school, I had developed a strategy for survival. I stayed invisible. I focused entirely on schoolwork and extracurricular activities that didn't involve the same social circles as Vanessa. I joined the robotics club, the art club, and volunteered at the local animal shelter. I made a few friends in those spaces, but I always carried a quiet fear of being mocked. Vanessa never completely stopped either. She wasn't as openly cruel in high school, but she still made comments whenever she could. At graduation, I remember looking around the crowd and thinking something very specific. "I can't wait to leave this place." And I did. I moved 3 states away for college and never looked back. For the first time in my life, I experienced what it felt like to exist without constantly anticipating ridicule. People didn't know me as the shy girl from down the street. They just knew me as Elena. College was challenging, but it was also empowering. I studied architecture, something I had become passionate about through years of sketching buildings and landscapes. Ironically, the same drawing skills Vanessa mocked ended up shaping my career. After graduation, I got a job at a design firm in a large city. Over time, I worked on projects ranging from small residential homes to commercial buildings. It wasn't an overnight success story. I struggled financially at first and worked ridiculous hours, but I was proud of the life I built. Years passed. I rarely thought about Vanessa anymore. Then, last fall, something unexpected happened. My father had minor surgery, and I decided to visit my hometown for a week to help my parents while he recovered. It had been nearly -1 years since I had spent more than a day there. The town looked both familiar and smaller than I remembered. On my 3rd day back, I stopped at a local coffee shop that had opened after I moved away. I was waiting for my drink when I heard someone say my name, Elena. I turned around and saw Vanessa. At first, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked older, obviously, but also tired in a way that's hard to describe. We stood there awkwardly for a moment. Then, she did something I never expected. She apologized. Right there in the middle of the coffee shop. She said she had been thinking a lot about the past and felt terrible about how she treated me growing up. She admitted she had been insecure and took it out on me because I was quiet and wouldn't fight back. Part of me appreciated hearing the words. Another part of me felt strangely numb. An apology 15 years later didn't erase years of humiliation. During the conversation, I also learned more about her life. After high school, she had tried moving to a bigger city, but struggled to find stable work. Eventually, she returned home and started helping her parents with their small landscaping business. She was still living in the same house down the street. Then she said something that made the conversation even more complicated. She had looked me up online. Apparently, she knew about my career and some of the design projects my firm had worked on. She asked if I would be open to reconnecting, maybe even collaborating someday, since landscaping and architecture sometimes overlap. I didn't know what to say. On one hand, people grow and change. Maybe she genuinely regretted what she did. On the other hand, the memories of being a lonely kid walking home while someone mocked me were still vivid. I told her I needed time to think. Since that day, she sent a few messages saying she hopes we can start over as adults. My parents think it's a sign of maturity that she apologized, but a close friend of mine said something that stuck with me. Closure doesn't mean you owe someone a place in your life. Now I'm stuck wondering what the right response is. Part of me wants to believe people can change. Another part of me remembers exactly how small she made me feel for most of my childhood. So now I'm left asking, Strangers for Perspective. AITA. If I accept her apology, but still refuse to rebuild any kind of friendship with my childhood bully. I grew up believing that, if you worked hard enough, eventually you could leave painful things behind. For the most part, that turned out to be true, but some parts of your past have a strange way of circling back when you least expect them. My name is Leah, and the person tied to this story is someone I spent most of my childhood trying to avoid, a girl named Brianna. To explain the situation properly, I have to go back almost 20 years. I grew up in a small town where most families had lived for generations. The kind of place where your teachers knew your parents knew your friends' parents, and gossip traveled faster than the school bus. My parents owned a small house on Willow Creek Road, a quiet street lined with oak trees and aging porches. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and full of memories. 2 houses down lived Brianna. Our families weren't particularly close, but we were neighbors long enough that our lives constantly overlapped. We went to the same elementary school, rode the same bus, and spent most afternoons on the same streets. When we were very young, we were actually friendly. I remember playing tag in the summer evenings and riding scooters down the sidewalk. Back then Brianna was just another kid in the neighborhood, but around 5th grade, something changed. Brianna suddenly became obsessed with popularity. And for some reason, I became the easiest target. It began subtly. She started making comments about my clothes. My family didn't have much money, so I often wore hand-me-downs from my older cousin. One day during recess she said loudly, "Did your mom get that shirt from the lost and found?" Kids nearby laughed. I remember forcing a smile like it was funny, even though my stomach twisted into knots. At first I hoped it was just a bad day, but it kept happening. Soon it wasn't just comments about clothes. It was my hair, my voice, the fact that I loved reading more than sports. By middle school, Brianna had built a tight circle of friends who followed her lead. If she laughed at something, they laughed too, and most of the time, the thing she laughed at was me. She never physically hurt me. That would have been obvious enough for teachers to step in. Instead, she specialized in humiliation, whispering, insults loud enough for others to hear, rolling her eyes whenever I spoke, encouraging other kids to treat me like I was invisible. The worst part was that I couldn't escape her because she lived practically down the street. Sometimes, when I walked home from school, I could hear her and her friends laughing on someone's porch as I passed. I started taking longer routes home, just to avoid walking past them. There was one moment in 8th grade that stuck with me 4 years. We had a group project in history class. The teacher randomly assigned teams, and by some terrible luck, Brianna and I ended up in the same group. During our presentation, I was explaining part of the research when Brianna suddenly interrupted. "Sorry," she said to the class, laughing. "Leah gets nervous talking. She thinks she's smarter than everyone else." The entire room burst out laughing. Even the teacher didn't realize what had happened. I finished the presentation with my hands shaking. That night I cried harder than I ever had about school. But something strange happened after that. Instead of completely shutting down, I started focusing on the one thing Brianna couldn't take away from me: my future. If I stayed in that town forever, I would always be the quiet girl she mocked. So I decided I wouldn't stay. I buried myself in schoolwork. I applied for scholarships. I spent weekends studying instead of worrying about popularity. By senior year, I had earned a full scholarship to a university nearly 900 miles away. The day I left town felt like stepping into a new life. College wasn't easy, but it was freeing. No one knew about Brianna. No one saw me as the awkward kid from Willow Creek Road. I studied urban planning and eventually started working for a development company that specialized in restoring older homes and neighborhoods. Over time, I built a stable career. Ironically, I also developed a passion for renovating historic houses, including the one I grew up in about 5 years ago. My parents decided to move closer to my older brother after my dad retired. They planned to sell the house on Willow Creek Road, but when they told me, I felt something unexpected. I didn't want strangers living there. That house held my entire childhood, both the painful memories and the good ones. So I bought it from them. At first, it was just going to be an investment property, but over time I slowly renovated it and turned it into a beautiful home again. It became one of my proudest projects. Even though I lived in the city most of the year, I occasionally spent weekends there to relax. About 3 months ago, my neighbor from across the street called me. He said someone had been asking around about the house. Specifically, someone interested in buying it. At first I assumed it was just another investor. Then he told me the name Brianna. Apparently, she had moved back to town recently after a divorce and wanted to live near her parents again. She had heard that I owned the house and wanted to make an offer. A few days later, she actually contacted me directly. Her message was polite, almost friendly. She said she had always loved that house growing up and wondered if I would consider selling it to her. Not once did she mention the past. Not once did she acknowledge how she treated me. Just a friendly request to buy the home where my worst childhood memories happened. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. Another part of me felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach, the same one I used to feel walking past her porch after school. Technically, I don't need to sell the house. I enjoy owning it, and financially it's doing well as a property. But some people in my life think I should consider the offer anyway. They say holding on to resentment from childhood isn't healthy. Others say it would be ridiculous to help someone who made my younger years miserable. Right now, Brianna is waiting for an answer, and I honestly don't know if my hesitation makes me petty or if it's completely reasonable. So now I'm wondering, AITA for refusing to sell my childhood home to the girl who bullied me 4 years growing up. My name is Adrian, and for most of my life I believed loyalty to family was the most important thing a person could have. My parents raised my sister Leela and me with that idea drilled into us from childhood. Family stands together. My father used to say whenever we fought, no matter what, for a long time. I believed that completely. Now I'm not so sure. I grew up in a modest town where opportunities were limited, but people tried to make the best of what they had. My parents both worked long hours. My dad was a mechanic and my mom worked night shifts at a nursing home. Money was always tight, but they did everything they could to give us stability because they were always busy. Leela and I became very close growing up. She was 3 years younger than me and followed me everywhere as a kid. If I went outside to ride my bike, she wanted to come. If I built something out of scrap wood in the garage, she would sit nearby asking questions. Back then, I felt protective of her. School came easier to me than it did to Leela. I like structure, planning, and solving problems. Leela was more emotional, more impulsive, but also very creative and social. People were naturally drawn to her. Even when we argued like normal siblings, I always felt responsible for looking out for her. When I turned 16, I started working part-time at a grocery store. It wasn't glamorous, but it helped me save money for the future. My parents were proud that I wanted to work early. Leela, on the other hand, didn't show much interest in jobs during high school. She preferred spending time with friends and focusing on social events. My parents didn't push her the way they pushed me. I think part of them believed she would eventually figure things out. After graduating high school, I went to a local college to study business administration while continuing to work. It took longer than a traditional 4-year path because I was balancing work and school, but I eventually graduated with very little debt. Around that time, I started a small home renovation business with a friend named Marcus. At first we were barely scraping by. We took on small jobs like fixing fences, repainting garages, or repairing decks. Most weeks we were exhausted and barely making enough to pay bills, but slowly Word started spreading. People appreciated that we showed up on time, finished projects properly, and didn't overcharge. Within a few years, our little business turned into something stable. By the time I was 30, we had several employees and consistent work. It wasn't some huge company, but it was something I had built from the ground up. During those same years, Leela's life took a different path. She moved between jobs frequently: retail, waitressing, a short attempt at photography. Nothing seemed to stick for long. She also moved between relationships that often ended badly. Despite everything, I always tried to help when she needed it. If she was short on rent, I covered it once or twice. If she needed a place to stay after a breakup, I let her crash at my apartment. I never kept score because she was my sister. About 5 years ago, Leela came to me with what she described as a fresh start. She said she wanted to become more responsible and asked if she could work for my company doing office management tasks, things like scheduling jobs, answering calls, and organizing paperwork. At the time, we actually needed someone for that role. I hesitated slightly because mixing family with business can be risky, but Leela seemed genuinely motivated, and I thought maybe this was the opportunity she needed. So I hired her. For the first year, everything went surprisingly well. She showed up on time, handled customer calls professionally, and helped organize a lot of our scheduling problems. Marcus even commented that she seemed like a good fit. I started feeling proud of her again, but gradually, small issues started appearing. Invoices went missing. Some payments from clients were delayed or incorrectly logged. At first we assumed it was just minor administrative mistakes. Running a growing business involves plenty of those. Then one afternoon Marcus called me into the office looking unusually serious. He showed me our financial records. Several client payments had been transferred into a separate account we didn't recognize. At first I thought it might be some kind of banking error, but after digging deeper, we discovered something much worse. The account belonged to Leela. Over the course of nearly a year, she had quietly redirected multiple payments into her own account. Not massive amounts individually, just a few hundred here, 1,000 there, but over time it added up. By the time we finished calculating everything, the total was close to $38,000. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. When we confronted her, she broke down crying immediately. She said she had been struggling with debt and felt embarrassed asking for help again. She convinced herself she would borrow the money and pay it back later once things improved, but the payments kept coming, and she never stopped. I asked her why she didn't just talk to me. She didn't have a real answer. Marcus was furious and wanted to involve the police immediately. From a business perspective, he was completely justified, but I begged him to give me time to handle the situation privately. In the end, Leela promised to repay the money over time. She also left the company immediately. For a while, I tried to believe the situation would slowly resolve, but over the following months, the repayment barely happened. Then I learned something else. A large portion of the money hadn't gone toward debts at all. She had spent it traveling with a new boyfriend and funding a lifestyle she couldn't afford. That was the moment something inside me finally broke. Not because of the money itself, but because of the betrayal. I had trusted her with my business, my reputation, and the livelihood of several employees, and she used that trust as an opportunity. I ended up cutting contact with her completely after that. Now, almost 2 years later, she has started reaching out again through family members. Apparently she regrets everything and wants to rebuild our relationship. My parents keep saying she made a terrible mistake, but that she's still my sister. Part of me understands that, but another part of me can't forget that the person who hurt my business the most wasn't a competitor or dishonest client. It was someone I had spent my entire childhood protecting. So now I'm stuck wondering if I'm being too harsh. AITA for refusing to reconnect with my sister after she stole from the business I trusted her to help run. My name is Nathan, and the situation I'm dealing with right now has completely torn apart a part of my life that I spent years building. Some people say I did the right thing by walking away. Others say I destroyed something good because of pride. I honestly don't know anymore to understand everything. I have to go back almost 15 years. When I was 23, I met Hannah at a friend's birthday dinner. I almost didn't go that night because I had just finished a long shift at work and was exhausted. At the time, was working construction during the day and taking evening classes in project management because I wanted to move into a better position eventually, but my friend insisted I come. Hannah was sitting across the table from me that night. She had this quiet, calm way of speaking that made you lean in when she talked. She wasn't the loudest person in the room, but somehow she still drew attention that we ended up talking 4 hours that night. At the time, Hannah was finishing her degree in education. She wanted to become an elementary school teacher because she loved working with kids. I remember thinking how genuine she seemed. There was something refreshing about how straightforward she was. We started dating not long after. Those early years felt simple in the best way. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had plans. I was slowly moving up in my career, and Hannah eventually got hired as a teacher at a nearby school. 5 years later, we got married. For a long time, I thought we had the kind of marriage people hope for. We supported each other through career struggles, celebrated small successes together, and built a comfortable life. Eventually we bought a small house and adopted a dog named Cooper. Looking back now, I keep trying to pinpoint exactly when things started changing, but the truth is, it probably happened slowly. About 4 years ago, Hannah started seeming more distant. At first I blamed stress from work. Teaching had become harder than she expected, especially with larger class sizes and increasing responsibilities. She came home exhausted more often. Sometimes she barely wanted to talk after dinner. I tried to be supportive. I took on more chores around the house and encouraged her to take breaks when she needed them. But the distance kept growing. Conversations that used to flow easily between us started feeling forced. Sometimes I would ask how her day was, and she would give one-word answers before going back to scrolling through her phone. One night I asked her directly if something was wrong between us. She told me everything was fine, and that she was just tired. I believed her. A few months later, something small happened that I didn't think much about at the time. Hannah mentioned a new teacher at her school named Calvin. Apparently, he had transferred from another district and was adjusting to the new environment. At first, he just came up occasionally in conversation. Then he started coming up more often. He's really funny, she said once. Another time she told me how he helped organize a school event. I didn't think anything of it. Teachers work closely together, and it's normal to talk about co-workers, but gradually, something started feeling off. Hannah began staying late at school more frequently. Sometimes she said they were planning lessons or organizing events. Other times it was grading papers or preparing for meetings. Again, I trusted her. We had been together for over a decade. I had never had a reason not to. Then one evening about 8 months ago, everything changed. Hannah had left her laptop open on the kitchen table while she was in the shower. I wasn't trying to snoop, but a message notification popped up on the screen. The message preview showed Calvin's name and the words, "I wish we could spend tonight together instead." My stomach dropped immediately. At first I tried to convince myself there had to be some innocent explanation. Maybe it was a joke or something taken out of context, but something inside me already knew. I opened the message thread. What I saw confirmed everything I feared. The messages weren't just flirtatious. They were intimate, personal, full of conversations about meeting outside of work, missing each other, and planning time together. From what I could tell, their relationship had been going on 4 months. When Hannah came out of the shower, I was still sitting at the table staring at the screen. She knew instantly that I had seen it. At first, she tried to explain it away as emotional support during a stressful time at work. But when I asked directly if the relationship had become physical, she broke down crying and admitted it had. according to her. The affair started about 6 months earlier. She said she hadn't planned for it to happen. She said she felt overwhelmed, disconnected, and that Calvin had been there to listen when she needed someone. Hearing that hurt more than I expected, because I had been there the entire time, or at least I thought I had. Over the next several weeks we had endless painful conversations. Hannah said she wanted to fix our marriage and was willing to do counseling. She promised she would cut off contact with Calvin and focus on rebuilding trust. Part of me wanted to believe her, but another part of me couldn't stop thinking about all the moments where she had chosen to hide things from me. Every late night at school. Every message, every lie. Eventually, I told her I needed time to think. I moved out temporarily and stayed with a friend. During those weeks alone, I kept replaying everything in my head. 12 years together, a life built piece by piece. But the more I thought about it, the clearer something became. Even if we tried to repair things, I wasn't sure I could ever fully trust her again. Every time she stayed late at work, I would wonder. Every time her phone buzzed, I would question it. That kind of constant doubt felt like a slow poison for any relationship. So a month later, I told Hannah I wanted a divorce. She was devastated. She cried and begged me to reconsider, saying the affair had been a mistake and that she loved me. Some of our mutual friends think I made the right decision, but others believe I should have tried harder to save the marriage, especially after so many years together. They say people make terrible mistakes and that forgiveness is part of commitment. Maybe they're right, but right now, all I know is that the relationship I thought I had doesn't exist anymore, and I'm still trying to figure out whether walking away was strength or failure. My name is Gabriel, and the situation I'm dealing with now has slowly destroyed a friendship that once felt closer than family. Some people say I should have seen it coming years ago. Others say what happened would have blindsided anyone. I still go back and forth in my head about it. To explain everything properly, I have to start when I was 19. Back then I didn't have a clear plan for my life. I had just finished high school and was working random jobs while trying to figure out what direction I wanted to go in. My parents were supportive, but they always encouraged me to find something stable. Around that time I met Ethan. Ethan and I were introduced through a mutual friend at a small local gym. He had recently moved to town and didn't know many people yet. We started talking while lifting weights one afternoon, and within a few weeks we were hanging out regularly. What made our friendship strong early on was that we were both in similar situations. Neither of us had a clear career path yet. Neither of us had much money, but we both had this restless energy that made us want to build something bigger for ourselves. We spent countless nights talking about business ideas, life goals, and what we wanted our future to look like. Most of those ideas were unrealistic at the time, but those conversations created a bond between us. Eventually we both found work in the same industry, auto repair. We started as basic technicians in a small garage owned by an older mechanic named Frank. The shop wasn't fancy, but Frank was incredibly skilled and taught us a lot about the trade. Over the next several years, Ethan and I became two of the most reliable workers there. We learned everything we could: engine diagnostics, electrical systems, body repair. Frank trusted us enough that he sometimes left us running the shop while he handled parts orders or administrative work. That's when the idea started forming. One night after closing up, Ethan turned to me and said something I'll never forget. "Why don't we open our own place someday?" At first it sounded like a dream more than a plan, but over time we started taking it seriously. We saved money aggressively. We researched what it would take to start a shop. We even spent weekends visiting other garages in nearby towns to see how they operated. 5 years later, we finally took the risk. Using our combined savings and a small loan, we opened a modest auto repair shop on the edge of town. It had 2 service bays, a cramped waiting area, and an old office that barely fit a desk, but it was ours. The early years were brutal. Running a business meant working longer hours than we ever had before. Some weeks we were at the shop before sunrise and didn't leave until late at night. If something broke or a customer had an emergency, we handled it ourselves. But slowly, the shop started building a reputation. Customers appreciated that we were honest about repairs and didn't try to upsell unnecessary work. Word spread quickly, and before long we had a steady flow of clients. By our 6th year in business, we had expanded to 4 service bays and hired 2 additional mechanics. It felt like everything we had worked toward was finally paying off. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan's lifestyle started changing. At first it was small things. He bought a much nicer car than he probably needed. Then he moved into a more expensive apartment across town. I assumed he was just enjoying the success we had worked hard for, but the changes kept escalating. He started dating someone named Vanessa, who seemed very focused on appearances and luxury. Suddenly, Ethan was talking about expensive vacations, high-end restaurants, and things that didn't really match our financial reality yet. I didn't say much about it, because his personal life was his business, but I did start noticing something concerning in the shop's finances. Some months our profits seemed lower than expected, despite steady business. At first I assumed it was due to parts costs or equipment maintenance. Then one evening I was reviewing our accounts and noticed several withdrawals that didn't match any business expenses. They were labeled vaguely things like miscellaneous operational costs, but when I traced the transactions further, they led to a personal account, Ethan's account. At first I thought it had to be some kind of bookkeeping error, but when I dug deeper into previous months, the pattern became clear. Small amounts of money had been transferred repeatedly over time, not huge sums. Individually, usually a few $100 or $1,000, but they added up. By the time I finished reviewing everything, the total was over $60. My stomach dropped. The next day I confronted Ethan after closing. At first, he looked shocked that I had discovered it. Then he tried to explain it as temporary borrowing. He said he planned to pay it back, and that it was just to cover personal expenses while things were tight. But the numbers told a different story. Those transfers had been happening for nearly 2 years. I asked him why he never talked to me about it. His answer was something I still struggle to process. He said he thought I would say no. That response hurt more than anything else, because for over a decade we had built everything together, from working in Frank's garage to risking our savings to open the shop. And instead of trusting me enough to have a conversation, he chose to secretly take money from the business we both owned. Over the next few weeks, things between us became tense and complicated. Legally, since we were partners, the situation wasn't as simple as calling the police, but the trust between us was completely broken. Eventually, I made the hardest decision of my life. I bought out Ethan's share of the business and ended our partnership entirely. It nearly drained my savings to do it, but I couldn't imagine continuing to run a company with someone I no longer trusted. Now Ethan tells mutual friends that I overreacted and destroyed a lifelong friendship over money. Some people agree with him. Others say I had every right to protect the business we built. But sometimes late at night, when I'm closing up the shop alone, I still think about those early days when we were two broke guys dreaming about building something together, and I wonder if I could have handled things differently, or if the friendship was already gone the moment he started taking money behind my back. I-29F have been NC no contact with my sister Maya to 7F and my ex-fiancé Liam 3OM for 3 long, grueling years. Last weekend was their wedding, a day I never thought I'd see, let alone attend. Against my better judgment and every instinct for self-preservation, I went because my parents begged me to be the bigger person for the sake of family unity. They told me that time heals all wounds. But they forgot to mention that some wounds are kept open by the very people who caused them. Liam and I were together for 6 years. We were high school sweethearts who had survived college, career starts, and the general messiness of our early 20s. We had a life. We had a beautiful Tudor-style house that we spent weekends painting, a golden retriever named Buster, who was essentially our child, and a wedding date set for October 2021. Maya was my maid of honor. She helped me pick out my dress. She held my hair back when I was stressed. She knew every secret of our relationship. In May 2021, I was away on a grueling 3-day business trip. I finished my meetings early and decided to catch the red-eye home to surprise Liam for our 6-year anniversary. I even stopped at the 24-hour florist at the airport to buy his favorite lila. I let myself in quietly at 6 a.m., heart racing with excitement. I walked up the stairs, planning to crawl into bed and surprise him. Instead, I found the surprise was waiting for me. I found them together in our bed, the bed I had picked out, in the house I called home. It wasn't just a one-time mistake born of a drunken night. The room was filled with Maya's things. When confronted, Maya didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She wrapped herself in the white silk robe I had bought specifically for my honeymoon, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "He was always meant to be mine. You just got to him first. You should thank me for taking him off your hands before the divorce." I walked out that day with nothing but my suitcase and the flowers. Because the house was technically on his family's land, I had no legal claim to it. Because Liam was the one who signed the adoption papers for Buster, he kept the dog. I lost my home, my partner, my pet, and my sister in a single hour. My parents' reaction was the final blow. While they claimed to be disappointed in Maya, they essentially told me that family is family, and that I should find it in my heart to forgive her because she was young, impulsive, and in love. They stayed close with Liam and Maya, even attending a celebratory housewarming party at my old house just months after I moved into a 300-square-foot studio apartment downtown. For 3 years, a poison has leaked through my family. Maya and Liam didn't just take my life, they rewrote the history of it. The narrative they spun and that my parents allowed to flourish was that Liam and I just grew apart due to my workaholic tendencies. Maya told everyone who would listen that I was cold, that I prioritized my career over Liam's needs, and that she and Liam only found comfort in each other months after our clean and mutual breakup. She spent years gaslighting our extended family, painting herself as the hero who saved Liam from a loveless engagement. I became the bitter career woman in the family law. When the wedding invitation arrived, I threw it in the trash. But then came the calls. My dad's health has been declining. He has a heart condition that has worsened significantly. His one dying wish, he claimed, was to see both his daughters in the same room again, to see the family whole. I agreed to go on one strict condition. I would be a ghost. I would sit in the back, eat the meal I paid for with my dignity, and leave without uttering a word to the happy couple. The wedding was held at a lavish vineyard. Every detail felt like a twisted parody of the wedding I had planned. The flowers were the same. The music was the same. Even the color palette was what I had shown Maya in my maid of honor binder years ago. At the reception, the champagne was flowing, and the atmosphere was thick with forced cheer. Maya's new mother-in-law, Judith, came up to me. Judith lives in the UK and had never met the ex-fiancé. She was beaming, clutching a glass of Prosecco. "Oh, you must be the sister," she gushed. "It is just so heartwarming, isn't it? How beautiful it is that Maya and Liam found each other after such a clean, respectful break with his previous partner. It's so rare to see such maturity in young people." She tilted her head, looking at me curiously. "And how do you know the happy couple? You look so much like the bride. It's uncanny." I was about to give a polite, vague answer and excuse myself when Maya floated over. She was already several drinks in, her veil trailing behind her like a shroud. She smirked at me, that same look she gave me over the silk robe, and addressed Judith. "So, Judith, this is my big sister. She's the one I told you about, the one who was always too busy for poor Liam. She was always off on some business trip or another. Luckily, she moved out just in time for us to realize we were soulmates and start our journey together. It was all very civil, wasn't it, sis? No hard feelings. Something inside me, some core pillar of restraint I'd spent 3 years building, finally snapped. The years of expensive therapy, the nights I spent crying over photos of my dog, the humiliation of being erased from my own life, and the absolute gall of her lying to this woman's face, it all came rushing to the surface. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a drink. I just smiled with a terrifying, icy clarity. "Actually, Judith," I said, my voice carrying across the immediate tables as the surrounding guests went quiet. It wasn't quite that civil. I didn't move out just in time. I moved out the exact same hour I walked in on them in my own bed on my 6-year anniversary. Maya wasn't just waiting in the wings. She was wearing the silk robe I'd bought for my honeymoon, while I was still standing there holding his anniversary gift. So, I suppose you could say I moved out to make room for a journey that they had already been taking together 4 months behind my back, all while I was still wearing the engagement ring Liam told me he'd never take off. The silence that followed was deafening. Judith looked like she had been slapped, her glass trembling in her hand. Liam, who had been approaching, froze mid-step, his face turning a shade of grey that matched his suit. Maya's face went from a smirk to a mask of pure rage. She burst into hysterical tears, shrieking that I was a bitter, jealous hag who was so pathetic I had to fabricate lies to ruin her one special day. My parents rushed over, but they didn't look at Maya. They looked at me with pure venom. My mother practically dragged me toward the exit, hissing that I was cruel, vindictive, and a monster for bringing up ancient history when everyone had worked so hard to move on. The aftermath left the vineyard and didn't look back. Since then, my phone has been a war zone. My cousins and aunts, many of whom had been fed the workaholic life for years, are in a state of shock. Some are sending me supportive messages, but the majority of the core family is furious that I caused a scene and traumatized. Maya during her first dance. Liam sent me a novel-length text accusing me of being stuck in the past and saying that what happened 3 years ago was between the three of us and shouldn't have been weaponized in public. My parents have issued an ultimatum. If I don't post a public apology on Facebook to the happy couple and admit I exaggerated the timeline due to emotional distress, they are cutting me out of the will and the family entirely. They say my dad's blood pressure is through the roof, and if anything happens to him, it's on my head. I don't feel like I lied. I finally told the truth when the person who robbed me tried to make me an accomplice in her lie. But now the family is in tatters, and I'm being told I'm the villain for finally refusing to play the part. I've been carrying this story for most of my life, and even now, almost 25 years later, it still sits somewhere heavy in my chest. Some people say I should let it go because we were just kids. Others say the damage people cause in childhood can last a lifetime. I honestly don't know which side is right anymore. My name is Mara, and the girl who shaped most of my childhood memories was named Olivia. Olivia. And I grew up on the same quiet street in a town where nothing much ever changed. Our houses were separated by one narrow yard and an old maple tree whose branches stretched over both fences. When we were little, that tree was where the neighborhood kids used to gather during the summer for a brief period of time. Olivia and I were actually friends. In 2nd grade, we used to ride our bikes together down the street and build little forts under that maple tree. She had bright red hair and this loud laugh that carried across the block. I remember thinking she was the coolest person I knew, but something shifted around 4th grade. It didn't happen overnight. It started with little comments. One day she told me my backpack looked cheap. Another day she laughed at the way I pronounced a word during a class presentation. Her tone changed in a way I didn't understand yet. At first I thought she was joking, but the jokes never stopped. Soon they weren't jokes anymore. Olivia was popular, the kind of kid who naturally attracted attention. When she laughed, people laughed with her. and once she started targeting me, it became a kind of unspoken invitation for others to join in. I remember one moment very clearly. We were in 5th grade, standing in line after recess. I'd been wearing the same pair of sneakers for almost a year because my mom couldn't afford new ones yet. Olivia pointed down at them and said loudly, "Did those come from the trash?" Half the line started laughing. I stood there frozen, staring at the floor, wishing I could disappear. What made everything harder was that I couldn't escape her, because Olivia lived right next door. Every morning we waited for the same school bus. Every afternoon we got off at the same stop. Sometimes I could feel her staring at me from across the street when I walked home. Middle school was worse. Kids at that age can be brutally creative when it comes to cruelty, and Olivia had become the center of a friend group that seemed to enjoy humiliating people for reasons I still don't fully understand. I remained her favorite target. If I raised my hand in class, she would whisper sarcastic comments. If I tried to sit with other kids at lunch, someone would mention something Olivia had said about me. Eventually, I stopped trying. I started eating lunch in the library. The librarians probably thought I just liked books. In reality, it was the only place where I could breathe. At home, things weren't easy either. My dad had lost his job when I was 11, and my parents were constantly stressed about money. I never told them much about what was happening at school because I didn't want to add to their worries. So I carried everything quietly. What Olivia never knew was that every insult, every laugh, every whisper pushed me further into myself. I became quieter, more cautious. I started believing some of the things she said about me. But something strange also happened over time. Instead of giving up, I started focusing intensely on school. It became the one place where I could prove to myself more than anyone else that I wasn't worthless. If someone thought I was stupid, I studied harder. If someone said I would never go anywhere, I made plans to leave. By the time high school ended, I had earned a scholarship to a university nearly 1,000 miles away. The day I left town, I remember looking out the car window at that maple tree between our houses. For the first time in years, I felt free. College was difficult, but transformative. Without Olivia's constant voice in my life, I slowly started rebuilding my confidence. I made friends who valued kindness instead of popularity. I discovered I loved psychology, especially understanding how people's experiences shape who they become. Ironically, the pain from my childhood pushed me towards studying human behavior. Years passed. I built a career as a therapist, helping teenagers deal with anxiety, bullying, and self-worth issues. Sometimes when my clients talked about their own bullies, a small part of me recognized the feeling instantly, but I rarely talked about Olivia. She had become a distant memory from another life. Then, about 3 years ago, my mother called with news. Olivia's mother had passed away after a long illness. Because our families still lived next to each other, my parents attended the funeral and mentioned that Olivia had returned to town to help her father. I didn't think much about it. Until 6 months later, I had traveled back home for a short visit and was taking a walk down the old street where I grew up. The houses looked smaller now, like they had shrunk with time. As I passed the old maple tree, I heard someone call my name, Mara. I turned around and saw Olivia standing in her parents' driveway. For a moment we just stared at each other. She looked very different from the confident girl I remembered. She seemed tired, almost fragile. We started talking, awkwardly. Eventually she asked if we could sit and talk for a while. What happened next completely caught me off guard. She apologized. Not a quick or casual apology, but a long, emotional one. She said she had spent years thinking about how she treated me. She told me things I never knew growing up. Like how her home life had been chaotic. Her father struggled with alcohol. Her mother had been chronically ill 4 years before anyone outside the family knew. She said she often felt powerless and angry as a child, and somehow she decided the easiest way to feel strong was to make someone else feel small. That someone was me. She told me she had regretted it for years, but never knew how to approach me. Listening to her explanation stirred a complicated mix of emotions. Part of me felt sympathy, but another part of me remembered being 12 years old and eating lunch alone in the library. She cried while talking about how ashamed she felt. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, but hoped I could at least know she was sorry. When the conversation ended, she hugged me briefly before going back inside her house. I walked home feeling emotionally drained. Since that day, I've been wrestling with the same question. I understand now that she was a hurting child acting out her pain. But understanding something doesn't erase the scars it left behind. Some people in my life say forgiveness would bring me peace. Others say forgiveness isn't something anyone is entitled to. So I keep wondering, AITA, if I accept that my childhood bully had her own struggles, but still can't bring myself to forgive her.